October 6, 1941. South of Mtsensk, along the Oriol Road. Rain needles the steppe as Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Wolf braces against the turret ring of his Panzer III Ossoff J. The engine note, anxious high, threads through the autumn mud, while his driver curses the ruts in a Saxon growl. Find Voraus. The gunner swings the 5cm KWK-38, short-barreled and clean from a morning wipe onto a dark shape rising out of the birch fringe. At first it looks wrong, like a silhouette sketched by a tired hand, low, broad-shouldered, a wedge of armor that seems to lean into the rain. The tank moves with the indifference of a plow horse, its tracks too wide, Wolf thinks, smearing the mud instead of sinking in it. Range 800, the gunner says, breath fogging the Zeiss sight. Wolf feels the recoil through his bones as the first round claws out and vanishes into gray distance. A white flash, a dull, humiliating clang. The round ricochets screaming off into the birches. The alien tank does not even twitch. Lod, the loader, rams another 50mm into the breach. The Panzer's turret motors whine, correcting a hair. Another shot. Another ricochet. This one sparks off the glacis plate at an angle that makes no sense at all to men who have learned war the hard way since June. Inside the cramped turret, Wolf can smell the cordite and the wet wool of his crew coats. He can taste their silence. Out there beyond the sight picture, the enemy tank's gun elevates with the calm of a surveyor. A thunderclap. Earth jumps. Shards of wet clay pepper the turret front. Lynx Smoke Wolf's voice comes out higher than he intends. The driver yanks the Panzer heaves, and a curtain blossoms from the Naverteidigungsgerät grenades and poured smoke pots. Through the visor slots, the world becomes a skittering smudge of rain smoke and black birch trunks. Rückwärts 30. The Maybach coughs, then grips. They slide down a shallow ditch like a sled. Behind them, across the rain-rinsed field, the tank keeps coming. Its 76.2mm gun is not long by German standards, yet it speaks with authority. Machine gun tracers comb the grass around Wolf's withdrawing platoon. Over the platoon net, the voices stack and tumble. Rounds bouncing, break left, short 75 needed. Is that a new KV? No faster. The company commander cuts in clipped and steady and names the apparition they have only heard in rumors from July T-34. Sloped front. Keep its nose off you. Wolf's Panzer rocks to a halt behind a shallow fold in the ground, a ragged line with two other Panzers. Rain ticks on armor. The loader's hands tremble just once, then find the ritual of work. Wolf peers through his binoculars, trying to read the strange anatomy. The enemy's hull looks like a door propped against a wall, angled, deflecting. Its turret, squat and purposeful, seems to crouch forward a boxer's shoulders. The tracks are wide as a shovel blade. Mud pours out of their cleats in slow ribbons. The German mind, trained to catalog, to classify Ausführung this and Modell that, finds no comfort in these lines. Try the lower plate, Wolf says, but even as he speaks, the T-34 slews, sleeks, and presents its angle again. The gunner swears softly. A third round goes, then a fourth. One strikes a track idler and chips it. Another gouges a streak that might as well be chalk. The enemy gun flashes. One of Wolf's platoon mates takes the hit, a hot punch under the mantlet. The Panzer shudders to a stop, hatches bursting like eyes squeezed shut. Two men spill out and become small in the rain. Across the net, someone maybe from 35th Panzer Regiment of 4. Panzer Division breathes into the ether. We cannot stop it from the front. Another voice, older, steadier. Flank it. Always the flank. So they try. One Panzer creeps left, nose-dipping engine muttering. The gunner keeps the sight on the T-34's turret ring, waiting for that fraction of a second when the enemy will commit to a turn and show too much metal. German tank combat lives on geometry, inches of armor angles, of incidence meters per second. But geometry has betrayed them here. The thing's armor is only 45mm thick, the rumor had said. 45, yet set at such a rake that the 50mm shots glance like stones off ice. Wolf hears it before he sees it, a rawer, deeper note in the rain. A KV-1, ponderous but relentless, looms behind the T-34 for a moment, like a cathedral shadow. The KV's appearance is a coda, an announcement that the Red Army has more than one way to outstare their guns. Withdrawal by bounds, the company commander orders voice tight now. Artillery will deal with them. They back away 5 lengths at a time, then sprint, then stop to lay smoke and harassment fire, the ritual of men who have been taught that survival is a drill. The funker mutters into the Fuji 5 set, calling for 10.5 centimeter support. Somewhere behind them, a battery snarls awake. The first shells land wide, then closer, mud fountaining around the Soviet pair. The T-34 turns its turret almost lazily toward the new threat. Wolf uses the moment vorwärts to cut across a shallow swale and steal the angle he wants. The gunner grips the traverse handwheel, breathing in and out, sights settling on the T-34's side plate as it quarters away. Feuer. The round slams in where armor is truer, less blessed by slope. A spark, a dent, maybe a crack, then the T-34 lurches angry rather than dying. The loader is already shoving in another round when a sheaf of machine gun fire rakes their glacis and ricochets like mad hornets. Wolf flinches so hard his headset bites his scalp. He smells fuel faint but present. Back, they fall away again, hearts punching until the birches thicken and the storm swallows the field. Only then do the men look at one another, seeing a new animal reflected in their eyes, fear mixed with calculation. On the way to the rally point, they overtake a column of infantry wet faces under Stahlhelm, who ask the question with their eyes. Wolf answers because he has to say it aloud, to believe it's sloped armor. We need longer guns. That night, in a half-roofed barn that stinks of straw and damp leather, the company spreads out sketches on a feed trough. Someone has traced the T-34's profile in charcoal, that impossible wedge. Men argue in low voices about optics, ammunition, and the new 5mm 60 barrel rumored for the Panzer III. A sergeant from the maintenance section, greased to his elbows, talks about track width, how the Russian machine floats where theirs drowns. Wolf listens, body buzzing the way it does after battle, and knows the truth is heavier than words. The war they imagined in June died today in the rain near Mtsensk. Outside, the guns rumble. Somewhere to the north, Guderian spearheads are being clawed back by men who know the ground and are learning fast. In Berlin, men from Waproof 6 will read reports like the one Wolf's captain now shapes with a fountain pen. Front plate sloped at approximately 60 degrees. 50mm rounds deflect at normal combat ranges. Recommend immediate upgunning. Emphasize development of new medium tank with wide tracks and sloped plates. The ink shines, then dulls. Wolf lies back on his bedroll, listening to the rain on the tiles and the soft ticking of cooling metal from the courtyard. He thinks of the enemy tank's deliberate turn in the field, the way it seemed to bend the laws they have counted on. Sleep finally takes him, though it is not the merciful kind. In the morning, they will go out again, and the geometry will still be wrong. October 8, 1941. A farmyard 2 kilometers off the Oriol-Mtsensk road. Dawn leaks through a lid of cloud as a battered T-34 squats in the mud like a wounded bull. Its left track has been sawn clean off by an artillery fragment. The idler lies in the rut like a dropped coin. Feldwebel mechanics in oil-blackened parkas move around it with cold breaths and pry bars, their boots sinking to the ankles. A dispatch rider throttles down splattering straw and an engineer with a Waffenamt armband. Oberingenieur Ernst Bruckner swings off the pillion and takes in the shape he has traveled 2 days to see. Wolf's platoon stands back, helmets tip the night still echoing in their ears. Bruckner nods once to the lieutenant, then steps up to the glacis and lays a flat palm against the armor as if greeting a livestock champion at a county fair. 45 mm, ja. he murmurs, but at 60 degrees. He squints along the plate like a carpenter sighting a board. Your short 50 will not take this unless you are lucky and very close. The barn becomes a workshop. Someone drags a trestle table into the yard and spreads a tarp upon it, chisels cold, sets a hacksaw, a portable drill with a crank that looks like a dentist's nightmare. The rain begins again, soft at first, then decisive. Wolf watches the Oberingenieur pull himself onto the hull and rap the glacis with a hammer. The sound is a dense, satisfied thunk, not the hollow ring he knows from Panzer plates. Bruckner marks the spot with chalk, then gestures to a mechanic. Cut me a coupon. Here. The saw sings. A rank smell of hot, wet steel feathers the air. On the T-34's deck, another pair of mechanics unlatch the engine hatch, and two men heave it up. Steam billows. For a long beat, no one speaks. The V2 diesel is a Revelation aluminum block broad, V fat intake runners glistening with condensate. Diesel, Bruckner says, almost to himself. Safer fuel. And lighter. Look at the block cast aluminum. He pinches the bridge of his nose like a man holding off a headache. He slides into the driver's seat and whistles. Look at the space. The pedals are crude, but this riding position is not bad. He taps the steering levers, then points at the periscope drum. View is acceptable, but the turret 2 men only. He lifts his eyes to Wolf. Your report says the commander also lays and loads. Wolf nods. He was hunting us, the lieutenant says, but his head was down in the sight. When we flanked him, he noticed late. Bruckner ducks into the turret. The ring is tight ladders of tool marks inside the cast shell. The PT-47 sight smells of old grease and breath. He runs a finger around the turret ring race and frowns at grit. Primitive finish, he calls out, voice echoing, yet it works. And this, he pats the mantlet, is well shaped. He emerges with black smears across his cheekbones, holds up a shell from the bustle, a blunt-nosed BR-350A, 76.2. Not terribly fast, but good weight. At 300 meters, it put a round under your friend's mantlet, he says softly, remembering the plume Wolf described. On the table, the coupon finally drops free with a wet clank. They measure thickness, then clamp it at the same 60-degree rake and fire test bolts from a jury-rigged fixture. The bolts skate off scoring, but not biting. Bruckner sketches, triangles, vectors, lines of normal incidence. He writes effective in block letters and underlines it twice. Your 50 L42, no. He taps the chalk. L60 may be a flank. 75 long for IV is better. He glances at Wolf. And you want something like this for yourselves? He adds, tapping the sloped plate. Quickly. A field gray Opel lurches in, spattered to the windows. Hauptmann Dieter Albrecht, the Abteilung technical officer, climbs out with a briefcase hugged against the rain. He spreads paper under a poncho lean-to. Telegram copies from Wa-Proof 6 in Berlin. Requests from Kummersdorf, minutes from a meeting where someone has scrawled in the margin, Russian slope a must study. They want hull angles, turret casting notes, suspension details, Albrecht says. Also track width, ground pressure, and why your people report this thing swims through mud. Because it does? Wolf says, pointing with the stick he carries like a teaching pointer. 500mm shoes. We sink where it rides. Their suspension is Christie C. He kneels by the road wheel, smearing mud away to show the big coil spring housing. No return rollers, fast travel on road, soft travel in field. He straightens and rubs his lower back, suddenly older than his 23 years. Our 3 jolts your fillings out over a plowed field. This floats. Bruckner listens without interrupting, then flips a page and writes, Wide track essential. Improve torsion bar travel. Reconsider bogey spacing. He glances up, a half smile, faint as a pencil sketch. We are not here to admire them, he says. We are here to steal from them with our own hands. They pry off a side plate to look at the welds. The seams are coarse globs of flux run and frozen like candle drips. Crude, a mechanic says, pleased as if the enemy's ugliness is a comfort. Bruckner shakes his head. Crude but strong. That is different. He writes again, good enough manufacturing. Shape does the work. On another sheet, he outlines an idea that has been gathering in workshops and drawing rooms since the summer, a 30-ton class medium tank with sloped armor, a long 7.5 centimeter gun and wide tracks. He does not give it a name. That will come later in conference rooms at MAN and Daimler-Benz, VK3002M and DB. Two visions wrestling toward what soldiers will one day call Panther. Midday thin soup, black bread, a cigarette shared in a circle under the barn eaves. Rain drums on the tin, and the T-34 hunches in the yard like a lesson you cannot unlearn. Albrecht folds a final sheet into his case. All right, he says to Wolf. We'll need your full action report and your men's statements. Times, ranges, angles. What worked, what failed. Berlin will want it yesterday. Wolf swallows the bitterness in his throat. What worked, he says, was not being in front of it. Bruckner claps him on the shoulder, a mechanic's hand heavy, honest. You gave us the one thing we require, he says. Time. He nods at the coupon on the table that chalk triangles the rain. Now we must pay you back with steel. The Opel coughs to life. The engineer and the captain duck inside, wipers smearing arcs on fogged glass. As they pull away, Wolf feels a queer loyalty to the ugly shape in his yard. The enemy tank that has humiliated him, and by doing so maybe saved his life in some future place where his own gun is finally long enough. Far east, the clouds bruise toward Moscow. Somewhere beyond the line, more wedges of armor prowl the sodden fields. In Berlin, telephones will ring. Call sheets will circulate. Men will argue over silhouettes traced onto drafting paper. And on another front, crews with cold hands and iron discipline will begin to slide long new tubes into old turrets because the geometry has changed, and the answer, for now, is length. October 15th, 1941. Army Group Center rear a drafty schoolhouse turned command post near Orel. The door bangs in a gust, and with it comes the stink of wet felt boots and burnt gasoline. Hauptmann Dieter Albrecht shoulders through the crush with his briefcase pressed to his chest. On the chalkboard behind the field phones, someone has sketched a shape Wolf now knows in his nerves as much as his eyes. A wedge for a hull, a squat turret like a clenched fist. A staff major jabs a pencil at the drawing. From your Abteilung, Albrecht lays the briefcase on a desk and fans out damp papers as if dealing a card trick that must work the first time. 2 field reports from 35. Panzer Regiment. 1 engineer's memorandum. 1 captured armor coupon cut at 60 degrees. He drops the dark rain-slick rectangle of steel on the desk. It lands with a thud that draws heads. The major runs his thumb over the gouged surface where test bolts skated off like minnows. Read, Albrecht says, passing the top sheet to a lieutenant on the phones. To wa proof. Copy Kummersdorf. Subject enemy medium tank T-34 performance and recommended countermeasures. He waits until the lieutenant begins to dictate into the handset, his voice flattening into the cold diction of bureaucracy. Front plate approximately 45 millimeters set to 60 degrees from vertical. Effective thickness exceeding our current 5 centimeter KL-42 penetration at standard combat ranges. Wolf stands at the edge of the room, helmet in the crook of his arm, water ticking off the skirt of his cloak. The phones chatter in crossed conversations, Smolensk Vyazma names he has never seen except on school maps, and in the pauses there is only the slow thud of a stove set too low. He watches Albrecht hold his ground against impatience, answering pointed questions with a mechanic's patience, ground pressure. Track shoes, Christie springs, vision devices, the 2-man turret that gives the German mind one thing to despise amid so much to fear. The major flips a page, jaw setting. Recommendations. Albrecht doesn't touch the paper. He looks the man in the eye. Immediate upgunning of Panzer III to the 5 L60. Acceleration of Panzer IV to 7.5 semi-km/h, 40 long. Priority on heat development for infantry guns. And a new medium design in the 30-ton class sloped armor-wide tracks. Put every man at MAN and Daimler to it. The room rustles a nest of uniforms, shifting in the same chair. Timeline, someone asks, knowing the cruelty of the question. Yesterday, Albrecht says, and even the phones seem to listen. Kummersdorf proving ground south of Berlin. November 2, 1941. The captured T-34 sits stripped and chained on a frost-hard stand, paint flaking to primer in the cold. Engineers in gray coats, the sort of thin city wool that pretends not to be afraid of weather, circle with notebooks and smoking breath. A stern man with bulldog jowls, Oberst I.G. Heinrich Fichtner from Heereswaffenamt, loosens his scarf and peers into the engine bay while a fitter cranks a portable starter. The V2 coughs again, then catches with a hoarse, oily contentment that seems to surprise the gathered Germans. Aluminium, a young metallurgist, says reverent and incredulous at once. For a tank engine? Diesel replies, Fichtner, safer. Longer legs. He touches the broad intake runner like a priest verifying a relic. Note the weight saved spent on armor and track. On the firing line, a Panzer III turret set up as a test rig barks the 5 L42 3 times into a sloped plate cut from the T-34's glacis and mounted at the correct rake. The first 2 shots skip like flat stones on a black lake. The third digs a shallow crater and stops. A rangemaster lowers his monocular notes without commentary. Behind him, a crate stenciled L60 waits with the promise of a longer throat. When the rig is swapped, the new 5 km/h 39 L60 cracks like a snapped chalk line. At close range, squared to the plate, it bites barely. At distance, it hisses away, denied by angle. The notebook pages fill with numbers that feel like a language you can read, but cannot yet speak aloud in battle. One of the men from Rheinmetall taps his pencil on a drawing of the Panzer IV. The 75 must be long, L43 at least. Longer if we can build it, Fichtner says, already seeing production lines jigs the tyranny of machine time. He stares at the sloped plate in its iron frame. Shape as armor. Very well. We'll answer with length as weapon. A field telephone rings in a shack. The man who answers it comes out pinched with importance. OKH wants a summary by nightfall, he says to Fichtner, and the minister will be briefed in the morning. The engineers look at one another the way soldiers do when told an attack will go in at dawn. Back on the front outside Tula. November 12, 1941. The sky has the color and hardness of pewter. Wolf's Panzer III wears a new barrel that looks indecently long. A slim lance shoved into a familiar mantlet, the L60 at last. The gunner strokes the handwheel, as if reacquainting himself with an old friend made better. Looks like a cane on a boy, the loader cracks, and the crew laughs too hard because the cold is beginning to bite through wool and leather and composure. They test it on a wreck left half in a ditch, a T-34 with its bow broken open like a beached fish. At 200 meters, the 50mm AP round smashes the side plate where the angle is honest. At 400, the nose still shrugs. The crew learns in 30 shells what the engineers wrote in Graf's fronts are for artillery and nerves. Flanks are for you. Wolf pencils it into his map case in a notation only his crew understands, a little wedge with an arrow drawn around to its side and the word Ja. A few days later, the first long-gunned Panzer IVs he has ever seen draw up in a column like men who have finally been given heavy coats. The barrels are L43's stubby, only in the new arithmetic of desperation, and the crews lean out to look at the ground they're about to own. One commander winks across at Wolf as if they share a secret. "Let us see if length pays," he calls, and the column lurches forward into snow that hides ruts like lies. The fighting that week is ugly and close hedged with brush and villages whose names stick in the throat. Wolf's platoon learns to stalk the wedge, smoke bait, turn it, then strike the flank where the numbers smile. Sometimes it works perfectly, and the T-34 burns its crew, spilling out in bulky quilted jackets, faces young and shocked. Sometimes the angles refuse them, and they pull away under a whip of machine gun tracer hearts bumping the inside of their ribs. In rare immaculate moments, a long 5.70 round from a Panzer IV cracks a T-34 across the front at near distance, hitting a seam, catching a bad angle, and men cheer because miracles are easier to believe, when they sound like steel on steel. At a crossroads near Dedilova, Wolf hunkers behind his turret and listens to the net as a veteran from another company narrates in a flat voice 2T-34 heading west on the track. Smoke now, turning, firing, hit. Second turning too late, hit again. The words are a recipe cooked under fire, simple, repeatable, the opposite of romance. Afterward, in a peasant hut warmed by a stolen stove, Wolf spreads his map sketches in the day's solutions with his pencil stub. The wedge still sits at the center of it, a problem set like a theorem. But the lines around it are changing theirs. In Berlin, draftsmen pull night shifts under lamps that buzz. VK3002DB and VK30. 2M. Crawl across vellum like cats in a narrow alley, two ways of answering the same question, how to be low, sloped, wide-footed, and armed with a gun that speaks in clauses, not stammers. The men who hold the pencils argue without raising their voices. Somewhere in those arguments, the word Panther takes its first breath. Outside, Tula snow stiffens to ice. The new long barrels glitter like icicles in blue dawn. Wolf peers through the sight at a white field and waits for movement at the tree line where the wedge will come from. He knows now how to meet it, if he is lucky, if his driver keeps a steady hand, if the gunner finds the side in the instant it is offered. He knows, too, that somewhere in Germany, a machine is being drawn that will make the wedge flinch. February 3rd, 1942. Heereswaffenamt, Berlin Tiergarten. Snow lies on the linden branches like chalk on a draftsman's sleeve. In a smoke-sour conference room, the air thrums with the quick, tidy scratch of pencils. Two sets of drawings face each other across a long table like duelists, VK30.02DB, with a leaf spring suspension and a T-34-like silhouette, and VK30.02M from man torsion bars, interleaved road wheels, broad-raked glacis. Oberingenieur Ernst Bruckner stands to one side with his notes from the field tucked into a worn folder, feeling the edges dig into his ribs as men with soft hands argue about angles measured in degrees that have already taken lives measured in names. Speed and simple manufacture, a Daimler-Benz man urges tapping his plan form. We can stamp these plates. Welders will understand these seams. Protection and growth. The man engineer replies, sliding a tracing that shows a thicker frontal plate steepened like a prow, and a gun that will outlive the year. A colonel from Waffenamt jowled tired, the sunken-eyed look of men who read casualty lists before breakfast, lays a fingertip on the man glacis. This angle, he says. 55 degrees. Thickness. 80 millimeters proposed, the man answers. Effective far more. With this, there will be no more 50-millimeter humiliations. His mouth makes the ghost of a smile. You may write that in the minutes. Bruckner opens his folder and slips out a battered photograph, the coupon they cut from the T-34's nose chalk triangles, still faint on the steel. Herr Oberst, he says softly, we must build shape as armor. The Russian machine taught us that. And wide tracks. If you choose a shape but starve it of feet, you will have built a horse that cannot leave the stable. Papers move, voices gather edges. Outside, a truck downshifts on Hofjäger Alley, chains clattering. The colonel straightens. Man proposal accepted in principle. Work up plate thickness and turret ring to carry a long 7.5 centimeter. We will require a weapon that can write its name at 2,000 meters. He raps the table once, no triumph, only a schedule. Man Augsburg, June 18, 1942. The assembly hall smells of hot coolant chalk and new paint. A half-born hull sits on stands, its glacis leaning back like a man bracing against a storm. Welds glow in the seams, like red stitches. A Maybach engine HL210 waits on a crate. A gearbox the size of a coffin glowers nearby. Young engineers thread between the stands, talking in a new grammar torsion bars. Schachtelaufwerk, interleaved wheels to spread weight and keep the wide track honest on bad ground. Bruckner and a plant foreman stand under the hull and stare up at the belly plate like peasants contemplating a cathedral. Weight creeps, the foreman mutters, tapping a ledger. Every solution is heavy. Every death in the mud is heavier. Bruckner answers dryly, but he rubs his temple because the foreman is not wrong, and the calendar is a tyrant. On the gun range, a prototype turret yaws on a stand. The barrel stretches absurdly long into the morning 7. 5 centimeter KWK, 42, L70. A lance of steel with a bark like a door slamming in a marble hall. At 1,000 meters, it punches neat surgical holes through plates meant to make short work of everything they had in 1941. This, the range officer says, lowering his glass, is a sentence that ends arguments. In the drawing office, clerks ink the name in the corner block as if baptizing a child Panther. The name lands with the surety of a boot heel on a boarding step. It is not poetry. It is a promise to the men who will sit behind the sight. Grafenwohr Training Area, Bavaria. March 5, 1943. Wolf stands in a rime of morning frost and studies the new animal from the side. The Panther is broader across the shoulders than his old Panzer IVs, lower in the belly than his 3, and the glacis, good God, that glacis leans back hard enough to make a man's eye trust it. The road wheels are a puzzle of circles within circles. The track is a broad belt that looks like it could climb a wet church roof. An instructor with a voice like gravel and tea wraps his stick along the hull. Weight 44 tons, he says. Maybach HL230 in later builds. Do not over-rev. It is not a motorcycle. You will angle for effect just as the Russians taught you by force, yet remember your own nose is a blade now. Your best armor is to make the enemy show you his side. He points at the breech. KWK 42 L70. Treat it like a violin. Clean oil check the recoil length every evening. This is not your grandfather's 5 centimeter. She is precise and she is expensive. Inside the turret, the world is bigger. Wolf slips into the commander's seat and breathes the smell of primer and canvas and possibility. The loader grins at the roomy bustle. The gunner strokes the drum of the new Scherenzielfernrohr rangefinder like a talisman. The intercom crackles to life. All stations Panther 213 traverse check. Motors purr, the turret arcs with a smoothness that feels like a promise kept. They drive. On the course, the Panther walks over ruts that would have rattled a Panzer III to confession. Across the boggy low ground, the wide tracks lay down their own road and gather it up again. The driver's knuckles whiten only once, when a frost-rimmed ditch yawns and the instructor barks, more throttle not less, and the tank climbs out with a lazy flex that makes men on the glacis laugh out loud for the first time in months. At the field range, silhouettes rise from the snow, a gallery of past mistakes. At 1,200 meters, a squat target shaped like a T-34's turret shoulder shakes under the 75's hit. At 1,600, the round flies flat and fast, finds the side plate of a battered hull, and exits in a white tear of splinters. The gunner lets out a breath he did not know he was holding. The loader pats the breech as if it is a living thing. The faults show themselves too, because nothing in 1943 works without complaint. Gearboxes balk if handled like farm trucks. Final drives run hot if a man loves his throttle too much. The maintenance sergeant hammers home the catechism at twilight. Grease points here, here, and here. After deep wading, strip the fan belts. Keep the spare track links on the nose. They are decoration until they are survival. In the barracks, under the slow, sweet stink of coal, Wolf writes to a comrade still on Panzer IVs near Veliki Luki. We have a machine now that makes the wedge flinch if we bring it to the field in one piece. He pauses, frowns at the page, then adds, "They say we will go east soon. Bring good boots. The Panther does not care if your feet are wet, but you will." Rastenburg, East Prussia, April 23, 1943. Maps crowd the table like a shuffled deck, Orel, Belgorod, Kursk. Officers' fingers pin them as if the paper might crawl away. Zitadel, someone says, as if naming it will make it wise. Panther brigades are inked into the west face of a salient that juts like a broken tooth. A general frowns at a list of delivery schedules. "We will have barely 200 in time," he says. "Fewer if rail is bombed." He looks up as if hunting a liar in the room. Back at Grafenvor, tank transporters nose up to loading ramps in a wet wood-smoke dawn. Panthers crawl aboard with caution that looks like pride. Wolf stands on the deck of a Sims flat car Palm on the glacis, watching steam ghost from the engine deck like breath on a cold morning. He imagines the field beyond Orel and the shapes rising out of the rye and the moment when geometry at last will favor him. The train jerks clanks, begins to roll east. In the yard, a line of old Panzer IIIs stands like veterans, waiting for a bus that will never come. Someone has chalked a rude cartoon of a wedge on a three's nose, with an arrow around to its side, the lesson that taught them the future. The snow along the sidings is the color of coal and old paper. In a wagon behind Wolf's flat car, Bruckner sits on a crate and writes in a pocket notebook with the stump of a pencil. Field trials will be the true test, he notes. Crew training paramount. Logistics forbidding. But the shape is right. He closes the book, rests his hand on the wood, and feels the vibration of the East in his bones.